I realized that I have not done a reading wrap up since February, and reading wrap ups are something I want to be doing every month. But instead of catching up, I figured I would do a tier ranking for all of the books that I read this year, especially since June is almost over and we are pretty much halfway through the year at this point. So, this is my reading for the first half of the year. My rankings are all time favorites. These are books that I will be rereading and will be talking about on this channel more because I love them so much. Then there are books that I loved. These are great books, but they don't quite make it into all time favorites. Then there's Fun Time, Great Books, Bummer, which are books that could have been better, and Yikes, which I think there's only one Yikes here. I'm not including any books that I DNF'd. I will be having a separate video on books that I DNF'd, and you guys will get to pick one of the books that I DNF'd in the first half of the year that I will then complete in the second half of the year and see if it was one that I should have finished or not. So let's get into the books that I actually finished and read in the first half of this year. These are roughly in the order that I read them this year. So starting with Kindred. This is probably the worst book to start with because I don't think it really fits into my tier ranking. I have such mixed feelings on Kindred. This is my first Octavia Butler book, and I do plan on reading more of her books. I think she has some very interesting ideas. This book did invoke a lot of strong emotions for me, but some of them are not always positive, and I also feel like I can't really talk about it because a lot of them are basically what happens at the end of the story. So if you don't know, Kindred is a book about a Black woman who is in 1970s, I believe, and she is pulled back in time to the antebellum South. I think she's in Maryland, and that's not really a good time to be in Maryland for a Black woman. So she has to figure out why she's there, and it's really like she has some very good ideas in this story, but I mean, I guess some of the questions it brings up are also like really good topics. I might be talking myself into liking this more, but like I don't like the ending. I don't like how the story concludes. But I'm definitely gonna be checking out more Octavia Butler books. And I also feel like I can't put this like this is where I'm going, it doesn't fit in my tier ranking because it wasn't a fun time. It doesn't go in fun time. But like I didn't like it enough to put it in loved, and it's not bad enough to put in bumper. Like it was a well told story. It also is typically like Octavia Butler's known as a sci-fi writer, and this felt a lot more historical fiction to me. But, I mean, there is the time travel element, I don't know. I'm gonna put it in fun time, even though it's not a fun time. Maybe it's just, like, great I should change this to be, like, great book or good book, something like that, I don't know. That's quite a way to start this. Okay, let's move through these. The next one is The Gilded Girl, which is a middle grade fantasy book that I read in the beginning of the year, and it is a fantasy retelling of The Little Princess, I believe. Basically, there's this girl who has magic who's going to school for magic, and her parents die, and she is suddenly without any income or any like financial support, and she ends up working as a servant in this school now, but like lower class people in this world aren't allowed to use magic, and she's rebelling against that and teams up with a whole bunch of other lower class people to you blot grow their magic, blossom their magic, whatever it is. It was cute. It was fine. It was very predictable. It's a middle grade book. It's not like I'm not the target audience for it, so I feel bad. Like it wasn't bad. It was probably worked best for the target audience, but this is a tier ranking of my personal feelings, so I'm going to put it in bummer because I think it could have been better, and it was fine. I do realize I have Crooked Kingdom on here twice, and I'm gonna move this one over here, and I'll just rank them at the same time later because we'll talk about them when we get there. Sulwe is a picture book, very gorgeous pictures. It is about a young black girl who has very dark skin and is very self-conscious about her skin and wishes to have light skin and does things including trying to erase her skin to make it lighter. And this star comes and visits her in the night and tells her a story about the star has a sister, and it's like basically like day and night and how it's important that we have people of all colors. It's an uplifting, heartwarming story, but it's also sad that we need a picture book about how your skin is beautiful just the way it is. I really liked it. The illustrations in it are gorgeous. I'm going to put this in loved. The next one is Moon of the Crusted Snow. This is a dystopian, apocalyptic story, thriller, maybe. This is a very slow moving story. It is about a Anishinaabe community on a reservation and how they deal with the apocalypse. So there's not a whole lot in especially the first part of the story going on because it's like, oh, we noticed the power is out. Well, that's okay. Sometimes the power doesn't work anyway, and they just go about their day. And it's kind of like a slow burn because like the longer things go, the more things start to affect the community. But especially at first, it's like, you just deal with the hardships and move forward. And it was a really interesting take on an apocalyptic story. And I'm really glad that I read this one. But there were some times that I felt kind of detached from the story, especially emotionally. So, like, it wasn't like my favorite ever, but I think it was a really good story. And I'm really glad that I read it. Is it fun time or is it loved? I don't know. It's going to go in a fun time for now. I can decide later if I want to move it up. The next one is Sorcery of Thorns. So this was a reread because the sequel novella was coming out. I read this, I don't know if it was last year or the year before. It might have been the year before. And at the time, I was like, yeah, this was a fun story, but it was just okay. But it was a story that really stuck with me. And I just remembered this world and these characters, which is my favorite part of the story. I do think the plot's weak in it. So this is about a girl who's growing up in this magical library and she is training to be a librarian in this magical library. And she has been told all of her life that sorcerers are evil, but then something wreaks havoc on the library and she ends up having to travel with a sorcerer and finding out that maybe her preconceptions weren't what she thought they were. And, the story ensues. So I really enjoy this story. I think the best part about it is like the writing and the world and the magic system, but the plot isn't great, but I would totally reread it. It's a fun time. So I guess it goes in no, I'm gonna put this one in love just because this is one that I came back to, and it's is one that, like, has stuck with me and I continue to think about. So that one goes in loved, and the next one is the sequel novella. This basically is just an extended epilogue of what happened to the characters after the original story. There's not much of a plot in the sequel novella. It's just like almost a cute romance, if we're being honest. I had a fun time with it. If you read the first one, I think it is a great addition. We get to explore the magic a little bit more, and that was fun to see. So I liked it because I liked the first one, but I don't think it was as strong as the first one. So I'm going to put that one in fun time. The next one is The Barren Grounds. So this is a reread. I read this one, I guess it was last year that I read it. And I listened to the audiobook the first time I read it. And I listened to almost the entire thing in a day, and I was very taken by the story. It was like, "Oh my gosh, this is an all-time favorite." So this is about 2 indigenous children who are in the foster care system, and they find a portal into basically the world of their tribe's legends, and it's kind of like a Narnia story. It is a portal fantasy, and I was just really interested in this world and these characters, and the second time I read it, it felt a little bit more juvenile. There is a lot more pop culture references that I picked up that I almost didn't even notice the first time. So the second time I read it, like, it didn't hold up as well as I expected. I still liked it. Um, but it wasn't as good as I remembered. So that's unfortunate, but I'm gonna put it in fun time because I thought it was still good. The next one is How Space Works. This is a nonfiction book. It is a very brief overview of outer space. I really liked it as someone who did not know most of the information in this book. But if you are looking for more deeper dives into particular topics. Obviously, this is not the book, but this is very brief overview about everything space related. So I thought this was excellent, and I'm going to put it in loved. The next one is The Poppy War, which is one of my favorite books that I read this year. I only read it because one of the book clubs I was in was going to read The Poppy War, and I wasn't sure that I was going to like The Poppy War, so maybe that's why I love it as much as I do because it surprised me. I have heard that it's, like, very dark and bleak and violent, and I didn't think I liked stories like that, but there's been a couple stories that I've read that had that reputation that I have ended up really, really liking, and The Poppy War is one of them. So this is going to be an all-time favorite. I have an entire review on it, I have a reading vlog on it, and I talked about it in my February wrap-up, so I will have all of those linked if you want to watch them and get more details on the Poppy War. The next one is His Majesty's Dragon. This is the first book in the Temeraire series. This is a reread for me. I am currently rereading the entire series on my Discord. I'm slightly behind right now, but I'm working on catching up. And this is one of my favorite dragon stories of all time. This is set during the Napoleonic Wars. It's a historical fantasy, and our main character accidentally becomes a dragon rider. And absolutely love his relationship with his dragon. That really is the core of these stories for me. Just I feel like these could almost be considered cozy fantasy, but there's a little bit too much action for that. But, I don't know, just the relationship and how much is focused on the characters in this story just kinda puts me in mind of more of a quiet, slow-moving, cozy fantasy, even though that's not really the genre, but this is an all-time favorite of mine. Next one is Raybearer. This is a book. I also have more details of this in my February wrap up. I liked this book a lot whenever I read it. I did have a couple issues, mostly with pacing and just with failing to have an emotional connection to the story, but I really enjoyed seeing this story. It's so different than anything else I've ever read, and I really enjoyed, you know, coming along for the ride. But the longer it's been since I read it, honestly, the less I remember about it. I feel like I either need to, like, reread it or, like, I don't know, maybe it's just not that memorable. I feel bad about saying that, but that's kind of where I am right now. I'm gonna put it in fun time because I have positive feelings associated with this book. Like, I remember having a fun time reading it. So I think I'm gonna give it another chance and reread it, and hopefully it'll stick better the second time. The next book is The Golden Compass, which is the only one that is going to be a yikes for me. I also have much more detailed feelings on this in my February wrap up, but I was extremely bored the entire time reading this. I did not connect to the characters. I didn't really emotionally connect to the story. And I was just really bored and almost DNF'd it multiple times. So this one is going to be yikes because even once I finished it, I was like, maybe I should have DNF'd it. Next one is Mufaru's Beautiful Daughters. This is also a picture book. This is based on African folktales. The king in the area wants to marry, and he wants to marry the most beautiful person in the kingdom, and these two sisters, one of them decides that she wants to make sure she gets to the king first, so that way he chooses to marry her instead. And along the way, she runs into people and she's kind of rude to them. And then the other sister, she realizes what happens, but she's going to go to the king anyway. And she comes along behind and then runs into people along the way and treats them very nicely. And then at the end, they realize that this was all a test, that how they were treating the people along the way showed if they were actually beautiful on the inside, which is what the king wanted to know in the first place. So I think it is a gorgeous story with gorgeous illustrations, and I absolutely love this picture book. The next one is Siege and Storm. So, the reason I did not do a reading wrap up for March is basically the only books I read in March were Grishaverse books because the second season of Shadow and Bone was coming out and I was doing videos for Shadow and Bone. So, I didn't want to just talk about Grishaverse, Shadow and Bone all the time in every single video. And I felt like if I did a reading wrap up for March, it would just be here's all the Grishaverse books that I read. But now I can talk about it in this video. So, Siege and Storm, I enjoyed. This is the first time I read Siege and Storm, Ruin and Rising, and Crooked Kingdom. I had read Shadow and Bone previously, and I had read Six of Crows previously. I wish I would have continued the, original Grisha trilogy whenever I first read it, whenever I was a teenager, because I think I would have liked this a lot more then. These books have so much potential. There's a lot of interesting story here, but there's also a lot of I mean, this is Leigh Bardugo's very first trilogy that she wrote, and I feel like it does have some failings of like just a new author or just maybe these were the types of stories being written at the time, but we've grown since then. Also, it is very much a young adult story, so maybe I'm also expecting too much of it now as an adult when this never was meant to be an adult story. This is a young adult story. There's a lot of romance here. There's a lot of jealousy, some love triangle stuff, and that stuff annoys me. So, that part of the story I'm not as much of a fan of, but these stories could have been written like multiple POVs and they have so much potential. The world of the Grishaverse is cool. The story that they're telling in this book is cool, and I do like that. So, I'm going to put I think I'm gonna put both Siege and Storm and Ruin and Rising in. Ooh, is it loved or is it fun time? I'm gonna put it in loved. No. Are they loved? Okay, I'm gonna put Siege and Storm in fun time because I feel like that has the biggest love triangle problems in it. And Ruin and Rising is going to be in love. Ooh, no, not all-time favorite. It's good. It's not quite that good. um, I think that's what I'm gonna do. I don't know. Next is Crooked Kingdom. So I had read Six of Crows previously. I actually started rereading it. I got about halfway through and I realized the show was focusing on plot points from Crooked Kingdom. And I was like, I need to read Crooked Kingdom. So I stopped. I put Six of Crows aside. I do intend to pick it back up eventually, but I haven't. And I just read through Crooked Kingdom and I loved it. This is my favorite Leigh Bardugo book that I've read to date. It was so much better than I expected, and it's so much better than Six of Crows. This one definitely goes in loved. I don't think it goes in all-time favorite, and I'm gonna put them both here because now I have 2 crooked well, I guess I could just not put one on the end. I'm gonna put that one on the end and just not include it. Next is Demon in the Woods. I listened to the audiobook and then I read the graphic novel. I believe this started out as just a short story that was an additional story in one of the printings of the Shadow and Bone universe, and then it was later turned into a graphic novel. I believe that's how it worked. This is basically a story of the Darkling whenever he was a lot younger, many hundred years ago. And I thought it was a really well done. It's not necessarily an origin story, but it gives you a little bit of a glimpse into why he does things that he does. But this is definitely before his full on villain era. Um, I thought it was a really good book. I am going to put it in loved, actually. Next one is Throne of Jade. This is the second book in the Temeraire series. And this is where you realize that if you have to enjoy books where characters travel and the journey is the point, not the destination, because pretty much every Temeraire book has a lot of traveling in it. And this one, I feel like, is the one where you really start to realize that because at the beginning of the book, we go, we need to go to this location, and it takes us the entire book to get there. And I did kind of forget how much of the book it took to get to our location. But there's a lot of things that happen along the way. This one is really fun because this is basically an inverse of the first one. So, in our first one, our protagonist, Lawrence, is a Navy captain and he suddenly is thrust into the Dragon Air Force. And he's kind of your fish out of water character because he is now in a location and area that he is not familiar with. And the Throne of Jade is basically the inverse of that because they're traveling by ship, but the whole aviator crew is going with Lawrence. And they are now the fish out of the water. They had been the experienced people that Lawrence felt out of place with in the first book. And now we have the reverse of they are the ones who are not experienced with life on a ship. So I really enjoyed this one. I'm gonna put this an all-time favorite, honestly, because this is one of my favorite series. I love it, and I love just spending time with Lawrence and Temeraire. Next book I read is Jesus and John Wayne. This is a nonfiction book about uh, e- evangelicals in the U.S. and how different things have shaped that. Um, I thought it was fine. There was this very thorough, it's well researched. I didn't feel like it had any new information. I had heard most of this previously. So it's not necessarily a problem with the book, but I guess a problem with me. So I don't really know where to put this. I kind of want to put it in bummer, but that I feel bad because it's not the book's fault. It's like me. But you know what? This is my tier ranking based on my personal feelings. There we go. Next one is How Minds Change, which is also a nonfiction book. And this is probably the book that I read this year that blew my mind the most, obviously, based on the title How Minds Change. um, this basically explores how irrational and stubborn humans can be. But, humans are not hopeless and they can change their mind, but they need a safe, non-judgmental environment to work through things because a lot of people have opinions on things, but haven't really worked through or investigated or really considered why do I think this. So having that space to really delve deep and consider why is the biggest thing for changing minds, not necessarily looking at evidence and having all these facts and like you can present someone with all of these facts and they won't change their mind even if they're completely wrong about something because they're not given that environment in which they can change their mind. So I found this really good. I will be rereading it. I don't know if I want to put it on all-time favorite. I don't know if I have like a nonfiction that's like an all-time favorite. Like I feel like my nonfiction and my fiction scale might be slightly different. So I kind of set myself up with a problem here. But you know what? We'll put it in loved. We'll put it in loved. Next one is A Clash of Kings, which is the second book in A Game of Thrones. And I thought this one was really good. I am reading this after I watched the show, and these books do follow the show a fair amount. So it wasn't I was not reading it going, "Oh, I have to know what happens next," because I kind of know the trajectory at this point. This is only the first 2 books. Um, so actually it's honestly kind of amazing that the show did that great of a job of adapting the first couple books into the first couple seasons. And it was very interesting getting to see anything in the book that's different from the show. Um, it's really hard to say. I kind of wonder sometimes if I would love the Song of Ice and Fire series as much if I hadn't watched the show first. Like, I really feel like the show was my gateway into this world, and I love the show. So, like, by extension, I also love the books, but I don't know, like, I can never know what would it have been like to read the books without knowing about the show, without the show existing. Um, but I had a great time. It was not an edge of the seat, have to find out what happened because I kind of knew the trajectory of things. But oh my gosh, that just my screen moved. But yeah, I'm gonna put it in loved. I I almost want to put it in fun time. Just I don't know why. I don't know if it was like as good, but it was really good. I don't know. Next one is Love in the Library. This is a picture book again. This is about two people who met and fell in love and married in they met in the Japanese internment camps in the US during World War II. So it's kind of a positive story uh, with the backdrop of a very negative story of harsh reality of hard times, but there can be good things that you can find within those hard times. I think it's good. I liked it a lot. Next one is The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi, which I have a complete dedicated review to because this is one of my favorite books. I will be rereading this. I cannot wait for the rest of the series. The first book does wrap things up very well. It's not a cliffhanger at all, but I just want more of this world, of this character. This is a pirate who has retired and she gets conned into going out on one more mission, and the first half of the book is the getting the crew back together, which is one of my favorite tropes, and the second half of the book is the mission, and it is a swashbuckling pirate story, but it is also a fun time getting to know these characters, getting to see this world. I had a blast. The audiobook is fantastic, by the way, and I want to read everything else Shannon Chakraborty has ever written. I have not read the Daevabah trilogy yet, and I want to change that because of how much I absolutely love this book. The next one is Yellowface, which I also have a review on. I will have that linked. Any of these I have reviews on, I will have linked. Um, Yellowface is very far outside of what I typically read. It is a contemporary story about basically these two people are friends in college and they both have dreams of publishing and one of them is very successful and the other one has really struggled to get anywhere in publishing. And the one who is successful ends up choking on a pancake and dying, and the other one steals her manuscript and reworks it and publishes it as her own book. And it is a wild ride from start to finish. It is definitely a fun read. But like so much outlandish drama happening in this book. It kind of feels like you're scrolling through author Twitter half the time reading this book. And I generally don't scroll through author Twitter because I do like to avoid the drama. But I mean, this was very entertaining read and so many discussion points that you can pull out of this and sit on and discuss. And I really like stories that have those. So I think this was a great book. I am going to put it in loved. Next one is Black Powder War, which is a third book in the Temeraire series. And again, we are traveling because that's what we do in the Temeraire books, at least past book one. And this one, I didn't notice it as much on previous reads of the series, but definitely reading it this time, this feels like a side quest. And I enjoy these characters, and I just enjoy spending time with Lawrence and Temeraire because most of it is character moments between them and just building their relationship and their character arc, which is why I read the series. But the plot in this one very much felt like a side quest. And I did find myself maybe slightly less interested in this one than I was in the previous two. So I'm going to put this in loved because I still loved it, but it was a side quest, you know? Next one is Warrior Girl Unearthed, which is also one of my most surprising reads this year because I absolutely adored it. This one is about it is present day, I believe the Ojibwe reservation. It is about a girl who unwillingly ends up working for the tribal museum and then she finds out more things about her history. This is a young adult book, and our main character does very much seem like a teenager, but it also deals with some very heavy topics as well. And it really had an excellent balance of dealing with these heavy topics while also just being a teenager's life and not like super heavy-handed or I guess dark and depressing the whole time. But this story had me so gripped. So while she's working at the tribal museum, she does find out about people who have in their collection Native American artifacts and human remains that are not that the tribal museum guy is trying to have returned to the tribe. These are things that they go, these are our ancestors, these are our grandparents' baskets that they made, etc. And they want these returned to them so that they can be part of their story and not in someone's collection somewhere else. And it also deals a little bit with the missing indigenous women and girls and deals with uh, just so much. But our main character, she is kind of spunky. She says what she's thinking. She doesn't hold back. And she's also very loyal. She's one of your like ride or die friends. And it was really I love seeing this story, seeing this world through her eyes and seeing her grapple with these things. And I I mean, I don't know if it's all-time favorite, but it might be because I could definitely see myself rereading this. I've not read Firekeeper's Daughter yet, but now I definitely want to. And I could definitely see myself rereading this book. Is it all-time favorite or is it loved? I mean, it's gonna go in love for now, but it could work its way up to all-time favorite. The next one is The Jewel in Her Lapidary. This is a fantasy novella that I picked up because whenever I was researching new books coming out, the third and final book in this novella trilogy was coming out, and I was like, "Oh, this sounds interesting. I'm gonna go back and read the first one." And it was it was fine. I liked the world building was interesting. The writing was beautiful. I was drawn into the story right away, but I just got to the end of the book and felt like, what was the point? Why just why? I haven't decided if I'm continuing on with the series because like I mean the world building was interesting, but I just don't know because I didn't feel like I really understood the point of the story. So I'm gonna put this in bummer. This one was definitely bummer. Next one is Untethered Sky, which is the first book I've read by Fonda Lee, and I will be reading more. I know she writes, I think her other series is like full length novels, and this is a novella, but this was gorgeous. This was, I don't even know. It's an animal companion story. It's a story about friendship and family and grief and dealing with loss. And I loved it. It seemed somewhat reminiscent of A Monster Calls, which is also a book that I love. But this one is far less like dark and sad the entire time. This one has happier moments throughout. It's also a lot shorter. But I love this. I will be rereading this one. I think I don't know if it's an all-time favorite though. It kind of feels similar to Warrior Girl on Earth because it's gonna go in love for now, but maybe it'll bump up later. The next one is Inkblood Sister Scribe, which is a urban fantasy. It's basically modern day, but with magic. There's these three people in the story who have inherited a magical library, and they've inherited all of the problems that go along with the magical library. I don't know. There's so much to the story, and I have an entire review. If you want to see that, I will have that linked either in one of definitely in the description and probably in the cards as well. And I'm gonna put this in loved. I had a great time. I had a great time reading it. And my final book is The Great Bear, which is the second book in the Miss Saga. This is the follow-up to The Barren Grounds. And This one was basically the children come back from Misawa and they're dealing with life in our world, and they're trying to figure out how they can spend the majority of their time in Misawa because that's really where they want to spend their time. The problem is, me as a reader was much more interested in the problems that they were dealing with in this world than I was with the storyline in Misawa, which is really sad because it's one of those stories that's like almost good, but not really. The second thing is I love the friend that our main character made at school, and she is amazing and amazingly supportive, and I want to know more of her story. And of course, she's in our world. So the characters are just trying to spend as much time in Misawa and not and trying to avoid school because they don't like school. I mean, there's more than just they don't like school. There's like bullying going on and issues and stuff going on at school that's like reason not to enjoy it, beyond just like, "Oh, I don't like studying," you know? But I don't know, just the problems and the friendship dynamics and that kind of thing that was going on there was actually much more interesting to me. And then secondly, oh my gosh, so many pop culture references the entire way through this book, and our main character will just like quote stuff to people in Misawa that she knows does not understand these references, and then she's like always trying to explain them, and I wasn't interested. I I wasn't really interested, which is sad because, I mean, I still enjoyed the first one, but this one I enjoyed less than the first one, so it is going to go in bummer, unfortunately. I don't know if it's quite like, is it on the level of the other books in bummer? I think it is actually. That's sad. But there you have it. Those are all the books that I read and tier ranked. Let me know if you've read any of these or what your favorite and least favorite books are that you've read this year. And I hope to see you in another video. Happy reading.